The revolving doors of Strathmore Capital hissed open as I stepped into the marble-lined lobby. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor, understated like the rest of me. No bold jewelry, no designer clutch, no name tag, swinging with self-importance. Just a black wool dress, an old leather satchel, and the weight of memory on my shoulders. I hadn't walked into this building in 7 years. A man in a tailored navy suit nearly collided with me at the reception desk. Mid-30s, sharp hair, frantic energy. He glanced at the plain silver band on my wrist, then at the clipboard in his hand. "You catering?" he asked, barely waiting for a response. "Take this to level 47 Sky Lounge, and don't smudge the labels." He handed me a laminated wine list and a sleek black lanyard marked VIP Access. I blinked once, took both items, and followed him toward the elevator bay. The executive elevator required a key card. I tapped the pass he'd given me. Of course, it worked. As the door slid closed behind me, the lobby disappeared. In its place, silence and the soft mechanical hum of upward motion. I turned the wine menu over in my hands. Domaine Romane Conti Screaming Eagle, a $14,000 single malt. I was sure no one would actually drink. Still the same game status disguised as celebration. When the doors opened, a clean-cut security guard stood at the private access checkpoint. He looked up, recognition flashing. "Welcome back, Doctor." "Solano," he said with a nod. "Boardroom's upstairs. Elevator B will take you directly." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." As I crossed the marble threshold, I passed the spot where my name used to be etched on the wall, co-founder Luminar Labs. They'd taken it down after my exit, scrubbed my legacy clean, but the structure remained. Same glass panels, same sterile lighting, same skyline view from the rooftop I'd once stood on in tears, watching investors toast to the man who took my company. This time I wasn't walking in to pitch. I was walking in because we owned the majority stake in the fund hosting this gala, and tonight they wouldn't see me coming. The rooftop was a theater of glass and gold. Floodlights traced arcs across the Manhattan skyline, casting reflections off champagne flutes and polished cheekbones. Waiters floated through the crowd with trays of oysters and conversation points. Everyone looked curated $3,000 dresses, velvet lapels, thin laughter over carefully recited valuations. I stepped into the blur unnoticed exactly how I preferred. For a few moments, I stood near the edge, watching the skyline burn behind the Empire State Building. This city had chewed me up once. Now I tasted every detail slowly, like a dish I'd earned. Marissa Solano. A too-smooth voice cooed. Still doing the minimalist thing, I turned. Camille Harrow Strathmore's vice president of brand strategy moved like someone who knew the value of lighting. Her sequined dress caught every flash. Her smile was razor thin. We'd met once years ago she hadn't remembered. I didn't expect her to now. I smiled. "Good to see you, Camille." She looked me up and down, her eyes pausing at the plain black dress, the old leather bag, the simple flats. "You're brave," she said lightly, sipping her drink. I'd never have the confidence to come so raw. Before I could respond, a man behind her, a managing partner by the lanyard, chimed in loud enough for 3 nearby tables to hear. "That your knockoff again?" He nodded toward my wrist. "The watch." I slipped my hand into my pocket. Camille giggled, not at the comment, but at the validation it gave her. "You do love your little vintage finds," she said. Quirky. Kind of like rebellion chic. I kept my tone even. Or just practical. "Practical is brave," she repeated, lips glossy and meaningless. They moved on back into the swirl of cameras and colleagues, people who measured brilliance in sequins and sparkles. I exhaled through my nose, slow, no anger, no correction, just the quiet certainty that none of them had even a fraction of context for what they'd just mocked. Let them laugh. In 2 hours, I wouldn't need to raise my voice, not even once. All I had to do was lift my wrist. They'd mocked the watch, again, Different faces, same tone, same hollow smirk. I turned slightly, letting the rooftop lights graze its brushed metal edges. I hadn't worn it in public for almost a year, not because I was afraid they'd laugh, but because I wasn't sure I could carry what it meant. Amaya had given it to me 3 days before the hospital called. She was the older one, the loud one, the chaos to my stillness. A horologist by trade obsessed with precision and preservation. This, she'd said, placing the heavy velvet box in my lap, isn't for flex, it's for memory. When I opened it, I thought it was a replica, a delicate prototype, no serial number, no logo, no documents. Just an engraving on the inside, Nom Iuzio, AS. She looked me dead in the eyes. It's a Vacheron Constantin prototype, one of one. They built it for an internal competition and never released it. I won it, and now I'm giving it to you. I remember laughing. It's a ghost watch. Amaya smiled. No, it's a promise. You don't wear this to show off, you wear it to remember what's rare. She died 4 weeks later. Lung failure. No warning. 39. I didn't wear the watch for 6 months. Then one evening, I had it quietly authenticated Zurich private appointment under an alias. They spent hours under magnification and ultraviolet. The appraisal came back silent, reverent $2.1 million. Unreleased, verified, untraceable. I've worn it maybe a dozen times since. Today made 13. When I adjusted my sleeve just now and Camille sneered, I thought of Amaya. She would have laughed. Not cruelly. Not like them. She'd laugh because it was absurd how people measured things without understanding their weight. The watch wasn't my weapon. It was my whisper. And soon someone in this room would recognize it not for what it looked like, but for what it was. Because once they saw it clearly, the room wouldn't laugh again. It would fall silent. I excused myself from the rooftop, briefly stepping inside for a moment of quiet. The hall was empty, slick tile-framed awards, curated success. On the far wall, just outside the boardroom, hung a long row of etched glass nameplates. Mine used to be there. 7 years ago, it read, Marissa Solano, co-founder and CTO, Luminar Labs. Back when this building still belonged to the tech incubator that housed our startup. Back when I still thought equity and vision were enough to protect you from being erased. When the funding round hit turbulence, my co-founder Eli Brenner called an emergency meeting. I remember the phrase he used as if it were inked into my bones. Investors need someone more decisive at the top, someone marketable. He meant someone male, someone like him. By the end of the week, I was out. He offered a token advisory title. I declined. The exit agreement was clean, no lawsuits, no fights, just silence. They failed 2 years later. Burned through the money, pivoted 3 times, then collapsed in a merger no one remembers. But I didn't disappear. I left this building and built something quieter, stronger, and far less fragile than ego. Solatrix began in a basement. Just me, 3 interns, and a whiteboard we couldn't afford to mount. It took years and more rejections than I'll ever count, but we broke through. Now we power a third of all AI-driven financial forecasts across Asia and North America. 2 weeks ago, we finalized a controlling interest in the investment firm that underwrites Strathmore. They don't know it yet. It hasn't hit the wires. But as of this morning, I'm not a guest at this gala. I'm the reason it exists. I turned to look at the empty space where my old plaque had been. A faint outline still lingered beneath the new frame, like a scar. This time, there wouldn't be a nameplate, just silence. And the moment someone finally recognized what had walked back through that door. Julian Klein stood center stage, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing with the controlled ease of someone who had practiced his pauses. Behind him, a LED screen pulsed with Strathmore's latest campaign vision, velocity, value. He was mid-sentence something about disruption at scale when I raised my champagne glass for a sip. That's all it took. The motion lifted my sleeve just enough, just a sliver of exposed metal. But Julian saw it. He stopped. Mid-word. His jaw didn't quite drop, but his voice failed him completely. "That can't be," he muttered, blinking once, then twice as if adjusting for stage lights. I lowered the glass. Our eyes locked across the crowd. He took a step forward almost unconsciously, then broke entirely from the teleprompter. "Excuse me," he said into the mic, handing it off to his speechwriter without explanation. Whispers erupted as he stepped down, navigating through the audience with an intensity that made several conversations stutter into silence. Flashes from photographers followed him, unsure whether this was staged or scandal. He reached me in less than 10 seconds. I stood still. His gaze dropped to my wrist, now fully visible. The dull platinum glinted under the chandeliers. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly. Not hostile, more reverent, almost breathless. "Zurich." "Private listing?" I said evenly. "Zurich," he repeated, staring. "Last year's sealed prototype auction." I said nothing. I didn't need to. I tried to buy that, he continued, almost to himself. I submitted the winning bid, and it was rejected. Said it had already been taken. I tilted my wrist, letting him see the engraving. Number 0. AS. His eyes widened. "That's the Vacheron experimental piece. 1 of 1. I nodded. The room had gone quiet. People were watching us now, trying to place the woman who had derailed the CEO of Strathmore with nothing more than a sip of champagne and a steel cuff. Camille stood frozen near the buffet, lips parted. I could see the calculations forming behind her eyes. But she wasn't the only one who finally understood they'd misread the entire room. Julian leaned in, keeping his voice low. "Zurich auction. That's the 1 of 1 prototype, isn't it?" I met his gaze, calm. Anonymous bidder. Had to outbid someone desperate. He gave a quiet laugh, not amused. More like wind escaping a broken valve. "That was me," he said. He wasn't exaggerating. Julian Klein was known for 2 things outside of Strathmore's portfolio: his art collection and his obsession with rare watches. The Zurich auction had been whispered about in certain circles, a sealed prototype, never catalogued, disappeared into a private vault after final bidding. No press release, no identity disclosed. He had assumed it vanished into obscurity. Now it was here, on my wrist. Camille hovered nearby, her laughter just beginning to rise when she caught the exchange. Julian's expression stopped her cold. He turned slightly, eyes still on the watch. "You knew what it was." "I did," I said. "So did you." He nodded. "They said the buyer insisted on absolute discretion, wired the funds from a Cayman intermediary. It drove me insane for months." I took a slow sip. Must have been frustrating. He blinked at that and smiled just slightly. "I thought I was the only one who even knew it existed. You weren't." He looked back at the dial. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Do they even know what you're wearing?" My eyes drifted across the room. The crowd had returned to their social rhythms, but in that fragile way, people pretend not to be listening. Camille had gone pale, her lips pressed into a tight line. The same woman who joked about my knockoff was now staring at the watch like it was a loaded weapon. I turned back to Julian. "No, but I think they're starting to." He exhaled again. "You know, this is the kind of piece that rewrites conversations." "I know." He stepped back a little, collecting himself. "And you wore it tonight." "I don't wear it often," I said. "But I figured someone might finally notice." Behind him, another executive was already whispering something to Camille, who didn't respond. She was still looking at the watch. Camille recovered first, barely. She let out a scoff, brittle and dismissive. "Well, you got lucky." I turned to face her fully for the first time that evening. No smile, no tone shift, just steady. "Dr. Marissa Solano," I said. "Founder of Solatrix AI, 1.3 billion valuation, closed Series C last month." The moment rippled outward. A nearby server slowed mid-step. Someone at the oyster station paused with tongs still in hand. Conversations dimmed subtly like a switch had been flipped. Julian blinked twice, recalibrating. "You're Solatrix?" he asked. I nodded once. He looked truly stunned. My firm led that round. I know I said raising my glass. We appreciated the discretion. Camille's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. Her brows pinched. She was processing the chain of events, the mock dress, the sneered-at watch. The quiet woman she'd written off standing there, calmly dismantling the entire hierarchy she thought she owned. Julian glanced at her, then back at me. "Why didn't I know you were?" "Because it wasn't relevant," I said. "Not until tonight." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Julian turned toward the crowd, scanning the room, then leaned in slightly. "This changes things. Only if you let it," I said quietly. Camille stepped back as if distance might dilute what had just unfolded. Around us, people had begun adjusting. I could feel its shoulders turning subtly in my direction, heads tilting to catch snippets. The energy had shifted. Status was realigning in real time. I took another sip of champagne. This wasn't about showmanship. It wasn't revenge. It was presence. It was mine. And now they knew. I stood by the glass railing and looked down into the city below. 7 years earlier, I'd stood almost exactly here, though not on this rooftop, not in this dress, and not with this posture. I'd been in the lobby clutching a manila folder with trembling fingers, tears slipping down my cheeks as Eli signed me out of my own company. No credit, no title, no equity, just a clean, quiet severance and a handshake that meant goodbye. I remember standing outside afterward in the cold trying to call my sister. Amaya hadn't answered. She was at a watch fair in Geneva. I left a message I never deleted. They took everything and I let them. I think I made a mistake. Now Julian Klein was beside me again, but this time not as a gatekeeper. "I'm serious," he said. "I want you on Strathmore's Global Advisory Board. We're rebuilding our innovation portfolio, and frankly, you're already doing it better than most of our partners." I met his eyes. That's a generous offer. Camille, hovering just behind him, interjected with a brightness so artificial it felt brittle. "Marissa, we should talk brand alignment. Solatrix and Strathmore could launch a visibility campaign, founder spotlights, feature content, cross-channel assets." I turned to her slowly. "We're focused on ethics," I said, "not glitter." Julian pressed his lips together, suppressing a smirk. I didn't say it with venom. There was no need. It wasn't a rebuke. It was simply a line drawn clean and final. Camille stepped back again, glass tight in her grip. I faced Julian. "Let's talk Monday. I want a clear look at your ethics index and internal audit protocols." His smile turned genuine. "You'll have it." The night had shifted, and they all knew it. The woman they once erased had returned not to plead for a seat, but to decide who got to keep theirs. I adjusted my sleeve. The watch caught a sliver of light from the chandelier above, refracting it in a halo across the glass railing. Julian followed the movement eyes, flicking to my wrist again, like he still couldn't believe what he was seeing. I should mention, I said evenly, Solatrix is also acquiring Calyx Systems. His face changed. It was slight, but in a man like Julian Klein, slight was seismic. The corners of his mouth twitched, his gaze unfocused for a half-second, recalibrating. Calyx wasn't just some obscure startup. It was Strathmore's primary back-end analytics partner. Every fund projection they made ran through Calyx's architecture. "You're acquiring them," he repeated slower this time. "It closes Friday," I said. "We've been in negotiations for 9 months. It'll be announced in the Journal next week." Behind him, Camille stepped forward clearly, trying to whisper something to him. Probably a salvage narrative, maybe a reframe, a potential spin. He didn't turn. "Does your board know?" he asked. "They will," I said. I imagine some already suspect. He nodded once tightly. He knew what that meant. Control over Calyx meant influence over every model Strathmore used internally. Their metrics, their forecasts, their leverage ratios, all tied to a company that by the end of the week would be mine. I looked at the watch again. "This was my sister's," I said softly. "One of one. Like the company I built." He was listening now in a different way, no longer out of politeness or reputation, but with recognition, not just of what had been accomplished, but what had been earned. I let the silence settle between us for a long moment before I spoke again. I bought two, actually. Julian blinked. One is in Singapore, I continued. It stays there, with our APAC lead. This one stays here. I held up my wrist slightly, just enough to catch the light again. One empire per wrist. Julian exhaled quietly. I see. Camille, pale and quiet now, had nothing left to contribute. I turned toward the elevator, toward the quiet of the city below. There was only one thing left to do. The night air hit me like memory clean cold, a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. I stepped off the elevator and walked past the valet line, where black cars idled and drivers waited with silent anticipation. Julian followed me out. I can have a car take you home, he offered, or wherever you're staying. I smiled, slow and deliberate. I like the bus, I said. It's where I do my best thinking. He hesitated. I could tell he wanted to offer something more fitting, more symbolic, but he didn't. He simply nodded. As I reached the street, a pair of associates emerged behind us. Mid-conversation, Camille's voice cut through sharp with disbelief. Why didn't we research her? Julian didn't answer. I didn't turn around. At the corner, the bus pulled up quiet and punctual. I boarded without a glance back. Inside, the lighting was low, the seats mostly empty. A man in a trench coat read a paperback. A woman scrolled through her phone beside a grocery bag. I slid into a window seat, the leather worn but familiar. The kind of place where no one performed, where silence didn't mean failure. It meant space to breathe. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure thread. Board seat confirmed. Next, complete the buyout, quietly. I hit send. Through the glass, I watched the Gala glitter above me, a glowing tower of noise and illusion. Somewhere inside, Camille was replaying every word she'd spoken. Julian was likely already drafting an internal memo, and the rest they'd start Googling by morning. Solitrix, the prototype, the Singapore entity, the audit trail they never thought to follow. But it wouldn't matter. By the time they pieced it all together, the papers would already be signed. Calyx would be ours. The board would shift. The system would turn with or without their permission. I leaned my head back, watching the skyline drift past. My wrist rested on my knee, the dial of the watch, catching only the faintest reflection of the streetlight above. Sometimes they only hear you, when the silence becomes deafening.